Good morning, Commissioner Murphy.
One more time Saturday.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm okay so far.
Good, thank you.
It's still early though.
That's true.
Can only get better, right?
That is true. Good morning, Attorney Kent.
Good morning. So sound and visuals okay this morning?
Looking and sounding great.
Okay, I'm coming to you from a different location, so that's good to hear. Thanks.
You bet. Good morning, President Hubble.
Good morning, Amanda. Are you going to be doing the virtual meeting guidance or is Janelle?
Janelle is not here today, so I will be doing it.
Okay.
All right, and good morning, Commissioner Foster.
Good morning, Amanda. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Great.
I'm gonna turn my video on. Can you see me?
Yep, they can see you.
Alrighty.
All right, Drew, let's mic check you this morning since you were presenting.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nathaniel, can we check your mic as well?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Thank you, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
President Hubble, Commissioner Wilson is a tentative for today. I'm just looking at to see if he's logged on yet. Just wanted you to know that.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I was just looking. I only see 3 of us present so far. Myself, Brad, and Grant.
Good morning, Commissioner Bookland.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Good.
Good morning, Kathy. Can we do a mic check quick?
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Wilson.
Good morning.
How are you?
I think I'm okay. Calling from a conference. So I'm not sure how much traffic might be behind me here. But I do have
From a conference, I thought you were retired.
I still got to keep well, I retired from my job at the town of Westport. Doesn't mean that I'm dead.
You just can't get enough. I get it.
Yeah. Got to keep my license up. So that's what it is. It's actually the League of Wisconsin Municipalities Attorneys Conference, which is being held at Lakeland Lodge. So I'm in one of the rooms now, in our room, just hanging out. But it's kind of a family thing that we come together. So anyway, there's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
You probably got friends that you know from a long time that you can see there too.
Yes, it's like a lawyer reunion, which
Yeah,
is kind of
fun.
scary, but yeah. So there's a lot of people from my old law firm are here, and from the Towns Association, and from the league that I've known for years, and it's was always great to come here and learn actually what's sort of new in government law, and it hasn't changed any. So always something.
Well, that's where everybody must be. I'm at the State Bar Convention across town, and all of my, I'm talking about shoreline development in about another hour and a half. And
Oh, good.
yeah, all of my friends are at your conference.
They probably are. I know that. That was one thing that was always kind of a big controversy, is that these two conventions kind of lined up with each other once in a while. Not always, but once in a while. And yeah, but it's a full house here, which is good. You know, it's nice to be able to get back together again, actually.
Kathy Lake, can you mic check quick?
Hello, everybody.
Great, thank you. And good morning, Commissioner Eskridge and Meyer. You two snuck in during the conversation, so welcome this morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, sorry about that. I had somebody come to the door. Ezra, you're there now? And
Yes, morning, Tom.
how are you? I don't think I've seen Sarah yet. Oh, there she is. She's on. Okay. Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to all of our guests. Amanda, do you want to go through the virtual meeting guidance, please?
Yes, I am happy to do that. Thank you very much. So good morning, commissioners, members of the public and staff. So we can have a great meeting this morning. Here's just a few decorum rules for all of us. Please ensure your mic is muted unless you are speaking. Please state your name before speaking. In general, please have your camera on if possible when you're speaking. Of course, you may turn it off if you are having technological issues or if there's a conference going on in the background. And as a reminder, the public chat is disabled, but you can still send messages to the host and to myself. And the meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. Thank you very much. And let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Announcements, we've got Mark Turbin, who's going to be introduced by Nathaniel Hayden. And then we'll go to Michael to see if he has any.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nathaniel Hayden, Operator Supervisor. I'm excited to announce that Mark Turbin has joined the operations group and will be a night 8-hour wastewater operator. Previously, Mark had worked at the UW hospital as a surgical technician. He's always looking for opportunities to learn, and that's what initially led to him developing some of his skills in the wastewater industry, taking a wastewater course. He lives in the Madison area, and he enjoys working on his house. During the first few weeks here, he's going to be training on day shift. If you get the opportunity, please welcome him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nathaniel. Welcome, Mark, and hope you enjoy your tenure with the district. Michael, did you have anything to add?
I do not have any announcements, President Hubble.
Okay, so that will take us to appearances by the public. Does anybody that's attending virtually have anything they want to say? Okay, I don't see any hands being raised or anything. So we'll move on to the consent calendar where we have the minutes of the 26th of May meeting. We have the cash statement capital projects. We have 2 new construction projects, one in Madison, one in Verona. And then we have a reconstruction project in the city of Madison. D is the approval of a professional service agreement amendment for the Lagoon Dike Improvement Project. Then we have the approval of professional service agreement amendment for the Shorewood Relief Interceptor Phase 2. Then review of bids and award of contract for acid digester 1 cleaning. Do we have any questions on any of those items before we get a motion? Okay, seeing no questions, we have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Wilson, I'll move approval as presented.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by
Foster.
Second by Commissioner Foster to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay, none, motion carries. That'll take us to topics where we've got three topics. The first is the overview of the district's pre-treatment and waste acceptance program. Marty, you're going to lead off on this?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Hovell. And actually, this morning, we're going to have Julie Moss, our pre-treatment coordinator, lead this topic this morning. So I'll turn it over to Julie. Thanks.
Oops. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Marty. I will get my screen up. Are you able to see this first slide?
Yes, Julie,
Yes, I
we
am.
can
Yep.
see it.
Okay,
Beautiful. It's
thank
a
you. I'm
beautiful
sorry,
thing.
just looking for that confirmation. Well, good morning, commissioners. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. My presentation today is a very high-level overview of our process for evaluating requests to discharge non-domestic wastewater to the sanitary sewer system. Waste requests and approvals are housed within the industrial pre-treatment program, so I'm the first stop for any requests that we receive. To set the stage, I will describe the types of wastewater we receive in really simple terms. Most of what we receive is considered domestic wastewater. That's the water that's typical of residential use in restrooms, small kitchens, household laundry areas. Domestic wastewater comes from homes as well as businesses because of break rooms, restrooms, and some office operations. We also receive quite a bit of non-domestic wastewater, which is a broad category from a wide variety of sources. And as we're getting started today, I will take a moment to briefly describe how our industrial pre-treatment permitting program fits into this discussion. We are required by EPA and DNR to issue permits for certain industrial facilities. Facilities permitted under our pre-treatment program have quite a few monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements on an ongoing basis. Facilities are required to be issued an industrial pre-treatment permit if they meet at least one of two criteria. Those criteria are a facility may be a categorical industrial user or CIU. The EPA has identified certain types of industries that are required to be permitted and to have pollutant limits established due to the nature of their industry and the processes that they operate. For example, some of the CIUs in our service area are pharmaceutical manufacturers, pesticide formulators, and metal finishers. The second group of facilities that are required to have industrial pretreatment permits are the significant industrial users, or SIUs. An SIU is required to have a permit if it discharges at least 25,000 gallons per day of processed wastewater. We currently have 18 permitted industrial users with 5 new permits that are in the process of being written and issued. There's a pretty involved process for writing these permits, and I'm not planning to get into that today. I wanted to acknowledge our industrial pretreatment program, and I'd be happy to go into more detail on that at some time. But the focus today is really on this last bullet. We're going to talk about the review process for all of the other non-domestic wastewater, that which doesn't fall under the formal pretreatment permitting program. So we have a couple of topics to go over today. I'll describe the types of requests that we receive for these non-domestic wastewater discharges. We'll go through the process we use for evaluating them. I'll cover what information we ask for and what resources are at our disposal to inform our decisions. And then I'll also talk a bit about how we handle requests to discharge wastewater that's impacted by emerging contaminants, because those requests take a little bit of extra care and consideration. When evaluating any request, there are a number of priorities and objectives that we take into consideration. We provide a service to our community, and we want to help whenever we can. So we are often the closest and most cost-effective option for disposal. So we are happy to provide this service when we are able. Of course, we always have to make sure that we'll be able to continue meeting all of the pollutant limits and requirements of our permits. And we want to make sure that the wastewater won't cause any harm to human health and safety. It's also critical that we protect our treatment plant from any interference or upset that could result from the introduction of a wastewater. And finally, we need to make sure that a wastewater won't contain pollutants at levels that could potentially pass through the treatment plant and cause water quality concerns in our effluent or toxicity in the receiving water. We want to make sure that each of these objectives is met, so our review process for any request is thorough, and it takes however much time is needed to ensure a comprehensive evaluation. There are several types of different requests that we receive. Some discharges are a one-time or short-term event. Sometimes we get requests for wastewater from projects. These usually have a beginning and an end, and they're typically well planned out, so we tend to get these requests in advance, and we're able to plan. But sometimes accidents happen, which are hard to plan for, so we do get some requests with short notice when there's an accident or a spill, and somebody needs assistance finding a home for that material. And then I'd like to spend a moment talking about construction dewatering, as we do get quite a few of these requests each year during the construction months. We know that in Madison and our service area, there's a lot of construction. New buildings are going up, utilities are being installed, and it's very common for this type of work to involve excavation. Excavation can often reach groundwater, which can result in water collecting in the excavation area. And there can also be precipitation that collects in low areas at these sites. And that water needs to be removed so that the work can proceed. This process is called dewatering, and it requires a permit from the DNR. Dewatering takes place by pumping water out of the project area and discharging it someplace else. And when DNR issues a dewatering permit, that permit specifies where the water may be discharged. In most cases, water encountered at construction sites is eligible for discharge over land or surface water. The water is simply pumped a short distance from the work site and it's returned to the environment. That's the best case, and it's very common. In some cases, however, that water may not be eligible for discharge to surface water. Wisconsin has a long industrial history, and throughout the state, including in our service area, there are sites where there is some contamination in the soil or the groundwater from industrial activities or spills. And those locations are well documented by DNR. Some common sources of contamination in our area were gas stations, dry cleaners. And if construction is taking place at or near a contaminated site, that water may contain pollutants that exceed the regulatory limits for discharge to surface water. And in these cases, the dewatering permit issued by DNR will indicate that the water must be discharged to a treatment facility or treated on site to meet the regulatory limits before it can be discharged to surface water. So these are the projects that we would be receiving requests from. We don't accept what's considered clean water for treatment, but we are able to consider water from sites that are lightly impacted by contaminants. And these dewatering discharges can last for a couple of days to several months. We also have longer term ongoing discharge from business processes. There are all kinds of work being done in our area. We have new businesses moving in, existing businesses expanding, all kinds of different work happening. And many of those businesses are generating wastewater in their operations. So we often receive requests from those businesses as well. And if a request to discharge is approved, that wastewater might come to us via truck, or it could be discharged directly to a manhole or other sewer connection. So now we'll talk through our evaluation process. Each request is well documented. The first step is always to complete a request form. One of our forms is just shown here so you can see what it looks like. One form is for the short-term one-time discharges. Typically, these are going into a manhole or hauled on a truck. And we also have a form for those longer term discharges from industrial users. Both forms ask for the same information. We want to know, where is the discharge happening? What is the source of the wastewater and what's in it? When is the discharge planned? How long will it last? What is the volume and the flow rate? And we're curious to know if there's any pre-treatment being planned. So the requester provides as much information as they can, and then based on what they provide, we may be able to process that request right away, or we might need to ask for some more information. To make sure we do a comprehensive screening of the wastewater, we gather information from quite a few sources. We ask for professional knowledge from someone who knows the most about that wastewater. This is typically the person who's submitting the request. They can tell us everything they know about that material. We also can do research about the industry or the activity that's generating that wastewater to try to understand what types of pollutants or the characteristics are typical and might be of interest to the district. Another great resource is what we call BRRTS. It's BRRTS. That's the DNR's online database of known contaminated sites in Wisconsin. So this tool is especially helpful for those construction dewatering activity requests that I mentioned earlier. And then we also use analytical data from sampling and testing. We review safety data sheets and other technical information to help understand the potential hazards. Once we have the initial information about the wastewater, there are some established regulatory resources to help determine whether we're able to accept that material. Our sewer use ordinance and our WPDES permit are incredibly helpful in informing those decisions. Chapter 5 of our sewer use ordinance spells out the limitations and prohibitions on discharges. The chapter opens with some general language stating that any wastewater may not cause any adverse impacts. And this gives us broad discretion in approving or rejecting wastewater requests. This chapter also establishes numeric limits for some pollutants, including certain metals and pH. Some wastes are prohibited altogether in our sewer use ordinance. Hazardous waste, PCBs, and certain pesticides are some examples of that. And then some wastes have requirements spelled out. They may not be limited, but they have certain requirements. Our ordinance addresses radioactivity, dyes, and temperature, for example. And these provisions in our sewer use ordinance can make our evaluation process very clear-cut. Our WPDES permit is another important resource in this process. We are permitted to treat municipal wastewater, which includes some non-domestic or industrial wastes, as we've been talking about, but we are not permitted to treat hazardous or infectious waste. So if a material meets the regulatory definition of either of those, it may not be discharged. Our WPDES permit also establishes numeric limits for various pollutants in our operations. We are able to accept wastewater that contains some of these pollutants that have limits in our permit, but we keep those limits in mind to make sure that it doesn't cause us to exceed one of our permit limits or violate another permit condition. Some pollutants have limits in our WPDES permit, but they don't have limits in our sewer use ordinance. Some examples of this are phosphorus, CBOD, and chlorides. We are often able to receive some wastewater with high levels of these pollutants, but it's important to verify on a case-by-case basis that these won't cause problems for our plant health or our effluent quality. And I have to mention that I can always count on our operations team and our laboratory and other colleagues to help consider a wastewater request, especially for those requests that are unusual or otherwise a bit more challenging. We also benefit from the expertise of the DNR's pretreatment coordinator, because there is a Wisconsin code requirement that any pretreatment system that's proposed by an industrial user must be reviewed and approved by DNR before that discharge may begin. And this approval is in addition to the district's approval. So it is very helpful to have this additional set of eyes on pretreatment systems when industries are proposing them. So while working through the evaluation of any wastewater discharge request, having our regulatory resources and the expertise of my colleagues and others really informs that decision-making process so we can be confident in our determinations. Now, for most requests, we are able to rely on the established knowledge and resources covered in the previous couple of slides. But I would like to spend a moment talking about emerging contaminants because they do pose some special challenges. According to the EPA, an emerging contaminant is a chemical or material characterized by a perceived, potential, or real threat to human health or the environment, or by a lack of published health standards. These are always challenging because we have more questions than answers about them. That's what makes them emerging. As we start considering any new emerging contaminant in the context of our waste acceptance program, we wonder, are there levels of the contaminant that are safe in the environment? You know, usually we don't have a lot of research to look at. The research is just starting to happen, so there's very limited data, and that research takes time. We wonder if and when regulatory limits will be established, and what would those limits be for us? Regulatory limits are developed using toxicology data, and without that data, our regulators don't really have enough information to develop limits to inform our decision making. And we also wonder if the contaminant is present in our influent and effluent. In the beginning stages of understanding an emerging contaminant, there may not be laboratory methods that are approved to help us quantify those questions. So in the early stages, we start with very limited understanding about the levels of those contaminants in our treatment system. And as such, we proceed with an abundance of caution when it comes to accepting wastewater that contains emerging contaminants. There have been lots of these contaminants over the years, and there are a number of them on the horizon today. One current example is PFAS. So I'll use that to illustrate how the waste evaluation process differs for these requests. The conversation about PFAS at the district has been going on for several years. We've been working to try to understand what these compounds are, what hazards they present, and what they mean for our utility. During the first few years of the discussion, we were asking all of the questions we just talked about. We didn't have a lot of answers, and we were learning more day by day. Because our knowledge and understanding were still developing, we took a cautious approach. We lacked regulatory direction, and we didn't understand our own PFAS story fully, especially while analytical methods were still being developed. So our initial approach was to not approve the discharge of any wastewater known to be impacted by PFAS. Today, we have more answers to those questions. There have been some toxicology studies conducted to evaluate the impacts of PFAS compounds on the environment as well as human health. The DNR has used data from that research to calculate regulatory thresholds using the DNR's established process. The DNR has proposed regulatory thresholds for surface water for two PFAS compounds, PFOA and PFOS. And what that means for us is that these are the numeric thresholds that we expect to have in our next WPDES permit. And that is one of our previously unanswered questions. We've also been conducting voluntary testing of our own influent and effluent, as well as other points in our treatment system. Analytical methods have been approved, so we have a high degree of confidence in our lab results. We have some data from that initial testing, and we're continuing to analyze samples monthly as part of our phase 2 testing that you've heard about from Marty. Results from the initial couple of plant testing events indicate that our effluent is below or in compliance with those thresholds, those proposed thresholds for PFOA and PFOS. And with these key developments, we are now at a point where we can reevaluate our approach, as we may be able to receive some wastewater that contains these emerging contaminants. We can use our plant data and the anticipated permit limits to consider a science-based approach for evaluating them. Our approach will continue to be flexible and adapt as we get even more plant data as regulations develop further. And to get back to our general discussion, I do want to mention that our owner communities are welcome to be involved in the approval process for any discharge requests. If the discharge is to a manhole or other sanitary sewer connection, the owner community is notified, and they always have the opportunity to approve the request as well. Owner communities have their own sewer ordinances, and they have interest in what's being discharged to their systems. And then just a quick note on billing. The district only bills for hauled waste that comes to us on a truck. Any billing for direct discharges to either a manhole or a other connection, those billing efforts are handled by the owner communities. So once the review process is complete, there are a few possible outcomes. The wastewater may be approved for discharge as requested, or we may include some conditions for that approval. The wastewater may be not approved. Sometimes we don't have enough information to approve a request. For example, we may need some more analytical data or a safety data sheet to complete the review. Sometimes the discharge can't be approved as it is, but the requester might be looking into installing a pretreatment system, so the wastewater would then become eligible for sanitary sewer disposal. And we're always happy to work with our industrial users as they explore their options. And then, some waste is rejected. As we talked about earlier, sometimes we are not able to accept a wastewater at all, and the request is politely rejected. In those cases, the requester needs to find a different outlet for that wastewater. And that brings us to the end of that general overview of our waste acceptance process. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Anybody have any questions?
I do, President Hubble. I can't find my raise hand button right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Grant.
Thank you. What a great presentation, Julie. Thank you. Really, really excellent. So I have sort of a specific example that highlights my question, so I'm just going to use it. I think it could be applicable to other scenarios, but so this kind of came to my attention through the Old Brick Park boat launch. There was a need to dredge to be able to keep that usable for boaters putting in there. It's a pretty, kind of important regional access point into Lake Monona. And it seems like, and there's a, pretty high level, relatively high level of PFAS, through Starkweather Creek, I think, as most everybody understands. And probably not surprisingly, more elevated levels in the sediment there that needed to come out. And, I think this was probably happening during the time where there's still a lot of questions, et cetera. But I'm wondering, obviously I've asked for a lot of attention to PFAS, and, I'm really grateful that we're kind of leading in that way in terms of started doing testing before it was required, et cetera. And so I appreciate using a lot of care with it. But I'm also thinking, particularly for like owner communities, are there opportunities now to kind of either streamline or think about like trusted partners model or something? And I think it probably may need to include Dane County and the landfill in that conversation. Because so I guess a bunch of questions in there, like, is there an opportunity for something like that? Could we get some folks from City of Madison, the district, the county landfill, and I'm thinking there may be other member community contacts that might be interested in that conversation. And can we kind of streamline a process, particularly around PFAS, and kind of what that process should be, what the best disposal is for things that need to be disposed, and just kind of, at least all together with those three partners, sort of all feel kind of equally responsible to do the best we can do for the community, but also not have people feel like, that feels like a problem, I don't want to take that problem, and then everything just kind of gets stuck and gummy. So any thoughts, I guess, generally on that, or ideas that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Commissioner Foster. That is such a good example of where we are with a project-based request that involves these emerging contaminants. That particular project, we certainly have had conversations with the city and the landfill, and we're at a point right now where we don't quite have all the analytical data for that project, but at this point, this is where we are, where we're looking at what that process might look like. So I think we don't quite have the answers yet for what that streamlined process will be, but this is a good example of what's going to help us get to that point. I know that I have some colleagues who probably have some more to say about that.
No, I don't have anything more to say, Julie. I think that was a good answer. And just Commissioner Foster, I think Julie said it succinctly. We do always collaborate with partners. The process she outlined, is pretty streamlined. And I think that because of this emerging contaminant PFAS, our conversations allow us to be flexible in it, and it's working quite well. But please let us know if you know of some reason why folks think it's not streamlined, and that our response to these requests need to be paid more attention to. If that is a concern, we can certainly dig deeper into that. But I think at this moment, at least talking to all of our partners, and at least specific to that project you referenced, I think we're in a good place.
That's great to hear. I appreciate hearing that. And I don't, I guess I've heard. It's not even really. I think it's just identifying what it's what you've shared, Julie. Of like, we're all trying to figure this out, and we're trying to take due care. It's really important. So I'm not looking to cut corners or anything, but I think I've heard similar things related to dewatering for construction projects, etc. And so it's more of a like, is there an opportunity there? Particularly, again, I know you guys have to consider sort of any water from anywhere, and you have to have a process and answers. I'm wondering particularly for owner communities, where we could potentially have an elevated level of trust or something. Is there a way to figure out how to do things more quickly while still doing it appropriately? And again, if it requires, if we don't think it's something that we should be discharging, then figuring out in collaboration with the county and the landfill what needs to happen to be able to allow projects to move forward, with us as a community dealing with the results of that project appropriately. So it's great to hear. It sounds like things are continuing to move there, and there's probably things like on the City of Madison part that we could potentially do to also prepare earlier. I don't know what. Just I know it's having an impact on folks. I mean, that's I'm not a boater myself. I think it's really important for a lot of folks. Olbrich boat launch is just it's busy, and it's impactful on folks. And maybe it's not like people are dying because of it, but I think it's an important thing for the region. And I think if whatever we can do to expedite stuff is great.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I've got a couple, maybe more for Paul, or Marty might weigh in, or Julie. The first one is, if we accept a waste that has an emerging contaminant, so this is before they've defined appropriate levels or something, and it turns out that the waste we accepted is then above the level that is later set, do we have any liability obligations if that water or that pollutant is found downstream at higher levels than what's acceptable because we accepted the emergency contaminant, or because we accepted it before there were levels, you're given a pass, or what's the deal on, or are there any, maybe no emerging law on that type of situation? I don't know.
Well, I guess I would say generally that what we need to be aware of is, you know, as Julie outlined, I think very well, the first place you would go is our permit. And if it's not in our permit, you know, for example, to take it out of PFAS, let's talk about pharmaceuticals, which is something else that is being talked about these days. You know, there aren't any restrictions in our permit on pharmaceuticals. So if we discharge something that contains pharmaceuticals, we do not have liability for that. I think the other question that Julie mentioned is, you know, through our sewer use ordinance and our general pretreatment requirements, is it something that, you know, interferes with our plant, or it creates known toxicity problems? And some of that would show up in our wet testing. But the short answer to your question, Commissioner Hubble, is that if it's not in the regulations, there isn't a liability issue for us, in my position.
Okay, thank you. So that kind of gets more to the, if we do have levels that are now set, and Julie had mentioned for the PFOA and PFOS, that those levels for surface waters have been set. And then of course in the paper today, there's the article about EPA saying that no level of that in drinking water is acceptable. So I don't know if that's going to shift their levels in surface water or not over, you know, over the course of time. So that, you know, so that, I mean, you're doing something based on one thing and then they all of a sudden flip. That's one of my concerns, particularly with PFOA and S's, which are forever chemicals, but they're always there.
Stealing a little bit of my thunder from regulatory review, because there were a lot of things going on this week, but one of them is that our legislative joint committee for review of administrative rules allowed the current rule to go through, so that will be effective. And I think the important thing to note with the levels that Julie mentioned in her presentation, the 8 and the 95, those were approved by EPA. So, and they were approved as thresholds as opposed to permit limits. So it gives us, you know, quite a bit of flexibility in how we get there. Is it possible that those limits will be ratcheted down? Perhaps. But again, I would just note that what you heard from EPA issuing yesterday and in this morning's paper really has to do with drinking water supplies. So I do think it's going to create some immediate issues, you know, for the city and our other communities around drinking water. But I think in terms of wastewater, the fact that we now have a numeric limit that's been approved by EPA, I think gives us some stability for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Grant, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, I found it hidden in the reactions. Yeah, just for a future discussion, I'm a little embarrassed to say I didn't even know we had a sewer use ordinance, and you know, probably missed that in orientation, but I'd love to maybe put that as a future agenda item, just to kind of review that. Maybe others aren't as familiar with it as I wasn't, and seems like a really important thing for the commission to review, and maybe there's a space in there to try and document some of our kind of where we're at right now as it relates to PFAS, for example, and if we have some standards established about what we're going to do, what we're going to accept or reject, seems like we should probably be getting it in there at some point. So future agenda item request, I guess that is. Thanks.
Okay. And I don't see anybody else with a hand up. So I think you don't have anything more to add, Julie? Or Michael? No? Okay. So we'll, don't see any more hands. We'll move on to 4B, which is the 2021 Compliance Maintenance Annual Report. Drew, you're gonna lead off on this?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Let me just pull up. Okay. Hopefully now you're seeing my screen here. So yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Drew Cease. I'm the Regulatory and Process Engineer at the district. And today I will be talking about the 2021 Compliance Maintenance Annual Report, or the CMAR, as I'll be referring to it here on. So the CMAR is required by Wisconsin Admin Code. It also shows up in our WPDS permit requirements. And each year we need to present to our governing body, the commission, and receive approval on any sort of resolutions that come out of it. So the purpose of the CMAR, first and foremost, it's really looking at, our #1 goal at the district here is protecting public health and the environment. It takes any sort of monthly reports that we've submitted to DNR over the year and summarizes it in one place. So it's really sort of a way of tracking, how well our plant is performing and our ability to comply with our WPDS permit. Secondly, it's really a communication tool. So the district prepares the report, it's shared with the commission, and then is reviewed by the WDNR. And so this is a way to get all three of these entities sort of on the same page about what we're doing at the district here and how well we're performing. And then lastly, it's a way of identifying any sort of areas that we need improvement in. So it provides a really quick kind of overview of the grading system, highlighting what our strengths are here at the district and other things that we need to pay a little bit more attention to in areas of improvement. A couple of things that the CMAR is not. It's not specific to any one WWTP wastewater treatment plant. So when I say that, I basically mean that this is the same report that Madison gets, that Milwaukee gets, that any small rural community in Wisconsin, even if they're a lagoon system, they're all essentially the same reports. So there are a few sections maybe in the report or different questions that may not be super specific to what we're doing at the district here. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're reviewing that, is that everyone in the state of Wisconsin has essentially the same report. Next, CMAR, we're not reporting any new data or any new non-compliance issues. So anything that gets sent to the WDNR throughout the year in our monthly reporting, that's already been kind of summarized here in the CMAR. Any sort of permit violations have already been reported to WDNR here. So really there should not be any surprises when it goes to WDNR. It's more so just, like I mentioned before, kind of getting everyone sort of on the same page and having everything summarized in one place. And then lastly, sort of going along with that, the CMAR is not really meant to be a punitive thing. So anything that we report in the CMAR, if we have a low grade in a certain section, it's really not meant to precipitate any sort of enforcement action from WDNR. Like I said, anything that's already happened in the past year has already been reported. So this is really more of a way of prompting discussions and looking for resolutions to any areas of improvement that we need. So in the CMAR, there's a number of sections which are highlighted on the slide here. Each section gets a grade from an A to an F. A total of 148 points are possible. The GPA is calculated on a 4.0 scale. Any section that receives a grade lower than a B requires a response action. And so in each one of these sections, there's really a combination of quantitative and qualitative questions. So kind of some examples of that, effluent quality, those are all quantitative questions, basically looking at what we're putting out into the environment. And, depending on how well we meet those WPDS permit requirements, points are assigned to that. Maybe an example of some quantitative questions that appear in the CMAR, but don't have any sort of points or scores associated with it. In the last couple of years, there's been a request to provide energy efficiency use, both at our treatment plant and in the collection system. So that's a way for the DNR to sort of track, how plants are doing as far as energy efficiency goes, being able to compare kind of year to year and also from plant to plant. So that's some information that we provided to them. Qualitatively, there's questions in here that you can't really get a score for just because of the qualitative nature of it, but we're able to provide a narrative. So questions would be like, is the plant adequately staffed? What are you doing to manage I&I? Do you have are the projects that you have lined up in the next 10 years appropriate to address continued treatment plant performance? So here's our scorecard from 2021. You can see there's a lot of A's on here, which is always good to see. We did really well. Overall, we had a GPA of 3.59 out of that 4.0 scale. A's in all of the sections except for our biosolids management, which you received a D in. But yeah, just to kind of summarize here, we had an A in 9 out of the 10 sections. We did lose 15 points for our biosolids application, which we had a number of fields that we overapplied nitrogen to, which I'll cover in a little bit more detail in some following slides. But just wanted to highlight some of the some improvements that we made here, and then some positive things that came out of the CMAR. Is that the 2020 report, we received a B in our effluent ammonia. This year that was raised back up to an A, which is really good to see that we had some improvement in that area there. And then also mentioned that we only had one SSO sanitary sewer overflow and 0 treatment facility overflows. So that's that figure that you're seeing on the left there is tracking the last 5 years of our overflows. And aside from 2018, where we had a lot of massive flooding in the area, as you probably recall, the other 4 years that are in that 5-year chunk there, we performed really well and have been performing really well as far as our overflows go. So, 1 SSO in the last year, 0 in 2020, basically looking at 4 SSOs in the past 5 years aside from 2018 is, really just kind of speaks volumes to our collection system services and maintenance crews that have, keep the maintenance up in our collection system and are able to respond to storm events like we saw in this past week. Here is, really just kind of shout out our crews there. I mentioned that we have energy efficiency data that we've been reporting the last couple of years. So here's, the last 3 years of energy efficiency, basically measuring the kilowatt hours per 1,000 pounds of BOD that we treat. So that's our incoming load. There's not any sort of points that are assigned to this section. It's really just kind of a, information gathering from WDNR, and I thought that it would be interested to sort of point that out. Commissioner Foster, I see you have your hand raised, and cut to you here.
Yep, thanks, Drew. Just maybe if you'd be able to put this info into a year by year view and maybe send out to commissioners after the presentation. I think this is really, I'm glad you're sharing it, and would like to just see how it's hard to tell from this view with the monthly view, kind of how we're doing 21 compared to previous years. So if that's something you could pull together or somebody could, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can do that, definitely.
Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, I think maybe I'll just kind of point out here too that our energy typically sort of peaks in the summer months when it gets a little bit warmer. We have higher flows coming in, and Typically we have a higher air demand in our aeration tanks too that require a little bit more energy. So that's just something that I point out there.
One quick other thing on that. Maybe if you're pulling it together, comparing it to the or connecting it to volumes, because maybe that, like how much energy, per what we're doing it'd be interesting to see if how things are changing over time. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. So this actually does take into account. So it would be the loading or the volumes there, but the inside of the CMAR in the report itself, there is it breaks down based on volume and loading in there as well. But I can certainly, that would just be for the 2021, the report that's attached, so I can put together the next couple of years or past couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep. So then biosolids management, this is a place that we had a lower score on. We received a D in this area, so that requires that we provide comments in this section. So we received a D in the section due to over-application of nitrogen. There were 20 farm fields that we over-applied on. And so, that's typically a little bit higher than we've seen in the past, and I'll kind of get into some reasons why that is. But just for a frame of reference, cumulatively, you look at the amount of nitrogen that we were permitted to apply, and really these 20 farm fields, account for less than 5% of the total acreage that we apply to, and are less than 0.5% over the total amount of nitrogen. So, that kind of just puts the over application into some perspective. We have a really huge biosolids land application program. So that's just something to keep in mind there. But 14 of those 20 over application instances were due to database error. So what happened here was that there was some bad data that got into the database, and we used the database to calculate nitrogen application rates. That bad data wasn't caught going into it until after the end of the land application season. And that resulted in those 14 over application instances. So the steps that we've taken since then is that we've incorporated a new QA/QC process, and this flags any sort of bad data that results in application rates that are outside of what we would typically expect. So this is just another kind of a stopgap measure to really track and be able to identify bad data in the database ahead of time. The remaining 20 over application instances are due to some of our older applicator equipment. They're not equipped with GPS, and so we're really relying on the person operating the equipment to match the infield flagging with the GPS. And occasionally we'll have instances where the GPS and the human operator don't necessarily line up there, and we do have instances of over application. So I think everyone is aware that we're phasing out that older applicator equipment and bringing in new applicators that have GPS systems. So it makes it a little bit more precise going forward. We're also required to comment on any overflows that we've had. I mentioned that we only had one in 2021. So this was, as you might recall, the pump station 7 force main. A leak was discovered on the belt line when there was some road construction that was going on in that area. Is another instance where we had really immediate response, overflow action response from our crews. All the appropriate agencies were contacted, DNR, public health. We were able to discover where the leak was at and make those repairs to prevent any sort of reoccurrence of leaks coming out of pump station 7 by inspecting that force main and installing a liner. So just to wrap it up here, overall we had a really good year in CMAR terms with a GPA of 3.59. I mentioned we're required to have any scores that are below a B, need to have a response actions attached to them. So for the biosolids, I mentioned that we've implemented a new QA/QC process for reviewing that database, catching any sort of bad data ahead of time. And then we're also still in the process of phasing out some of the older Terrigator equipment. And then the overflow, I mentioned that we've made the repairs to that pump station force main. So any sort of reoccurrence there is, not expected. So next steps moving forward, we have certification and submission to DNR by June 30th at the end of this month. So with that, I will stop talking here and answer any questions that people might have.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Anybody have any other questions? Okay, Grant, you got your hand up?
Yeah, not really a question, but just wanted to share my appreciation for the good score and all the work that goes behind getting a good score. I feel really appreciative as a commission member that I don't have to worry about that. I know it takes a lot of work, and just wanted to say great job on all that. And then I think as in terms of the biosolids part of it, it'll be great for all of us to keep that in mind when we're thinking kind of longer term about the future of biosolids and thinking about what products and processes are going to be easier for us to keep good QC on and avoid issues. So it'll be good to bring that into the conversation as we continue to evaluate options moving forward. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Drew. I just wanted to comment, that nothing here was a surprise, because I think staff has done a good job of keeping us abreast of any problems that we had with our permit we knew about, and had several meetings discussing the overflow on at the belt line, the break, and then also had a couple that related to the issue with the biosolids. Okay, so Tom, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wondered, we don't need any action on this, do we? Is this just showing us a report that staff is filing, or do we need to approve it or confirm it or anything like that?
It does say accept.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so it does say accept, so I guess we should have a motion to approve the submission of the CMAR report, or the, yeah.
I'll go ahead and move that, accept and approve its submission.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson.
I'll second it, Murphy.
Second by Commissioner Murphy. Any further comments or discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, none, motion carries. Okay, so that will, Marty, you're up on the preliminary options, to accept preliminary options for consideration of Badger Mill Creek phosphorus compliance and the next steps.
Hello, this is Kathy Lake. I shared my screen, but I'm not sure it's actually, I can't find it on, I'm sorry. I'm not seeing what you're seeing. So are you seeing, can someone tell me if they're seeing the actual presentation or just a view of it?
Well, we're seeing your,
okay,
here,
wait, it popped up
I think
finally.
something
Okay.
changed right now.
All right, well, thank you all. My name is Kathy Lake. I'm the Pollution Prevention Manager. And today I'm here to give an update on Badger Mill Creek Alternatives Plan. It's been a few months since I was here last, so I thought we would start with kind of just a quick background. So,
Hey, Kathy, can I interrupt? We're seeing your notes page.
oh, interesting.
And then it types your, it types what you're saying too. Interesting.
Yeah, Kelly, you might have captioning on. So if you you want to select the go into the display settings and change the view of it.
Well, do you want to just run it from, oh, here's this. Well, I guess we're going to deal with, I'm not sure how to turn off the captioning, and I don't know how it started turning on. So it's a new.
Well, just go back to what you had. So it's better.
Yeah,
than
I think we'll just, hopefully this will work. So. All right. So with closed captioning here, I guess we will begin. So this is a photograph of Badger Mill Creek. Badger Mill Creek is one of the 2 effluent discharge locations that the district operates and maintains. We send about 8% of our flow to Badger Mill Creek each day on average. So we can send a maximum of 3.6 million gallons to Badger Mill Creek. All the rest goes to Badfish Creek. So if we have more flow than normal, more flow goes to Badfish, but the same amount goes to Badger Mill every day. The district gets about 6 milligrams per liter of phosphorus in the wastewater that we get at the plant. Our plant does a remarkable job of removing phosphorus. Our operations team is top-notch. The plant is designed very well. We remove about 96% of the phosphorus down to a level between 0.2 and 0.4 milligrams per liter. The challenge comes in that DNR enacted water quality standards for phosphorus for all freshwater streams in Wisconsin. So small freshwater streams have a water quality standard of 0.075 milligrams per liter. So while we're doing a great job of taking that 6 milligrams per liter we get down to 0.2, we still need to reduce it about 70% more in order to get to 0.075. When we look at our current discharge to Badger Mill of 3.6 million gallons each day, we discharge about 6 pounds per day more phosphorus to Badger Mill Creek than we're allowed to by our permit. In a year, that's about 2,200 pounds of phosphorus. Because of that, and the fact that we're regulated under the Clean Water Act WPDS permit, we have a compliance schedule to meet phosphorus compliance in Badger Mill Creek. Our first step in that compliance plan was a year ago when we submitted kind of our initial options as well as an optimization plan to make sure we couldn't optimize the plant any more to get additional significant phosphorus reductions. This year, we submitted a preliminary compliance options plan. So it looked at the options that we had on the table and kind of discussed each of those. And at that point, we refined down to our 3 options that we are planning to move forward. The next step is a final compliance options plan. So we have a year, well, not quite a year now, but at the end of March next year, so March 31st of 2023, we need to submit a final compliance options plan to DNR. And that is what we're gearing up for and what we're working right now to achieve. The options that we considered, we presented to the commission the last time I was here, and those involve treatment, water quality trading, adaptive management, reduce or eliminating flow, a site-specific criterion, and a variance. And the last time I was here, we talked about the options that were still remaining. So we had watershed approaches, we had treatment, and we had reducing or eliminating flow. We determined that a site-specific criterion couldn't get us far enough. There's a downstream water quality standard of 0.10, which is pretty close to 0.075. So it could help us with a 0.025 milligrams per liter, but it's not going to 0.25 milligrams per liter, but it's not going to get us to compliance. And a variance, we're unable to achieve a variance in conventional manner. The costs that we're looking at for phosphorus compliance for this 8% of our flow are significantly less than what we were looking at for treating for chloride or other parameters. So we determined that a variance is not likely for this discharge. Since the last commission presentation, we worked to answer the commission's questions. We continued to assess all the possible compliance options. We met with DNR and made changes based on their input. And then we submitted the preliminary compliance options plan. And then after that, created a more detailed report on the possible options. And that's the report that was included in your packet. There was a change to the preferred options when we met with DNR. DNR strongly encouraged us to include adaptive management as one of the compliance options moving forward. The Sugar River Basin is much different than the Yahara River Basin, where we have our Yahara Winds project, and I'll get more into that later. But DNR foresees a future TMDL in the Sugar River. They believe there's going to be a lot of work that needs to happen in the Sugar River. And if we're discharging to the Sugar River, they would like us to be a catalyst to help make those changes happen. When we look at moving possible compliance options forward, for the DNR report, we did not move treatment forward as a preliminary compliance option. While treatment is a viable option with respect to phosphorus compliance for this 8% of our flow, and this one discharge location, doing so does have a lot of drawbacks. First and foremost, it's the most expensive alternative. It negatively impacts the district's goals of reducing energy consumption and carbon footprint associated with manufacturing and transportation of chemicals. It's not in line with recent district decisions. So the energy study that the commission approved recommended eliminating that discharge to Badger Mill Creek. The 50-year master plan that the district commission approved eliminates the potential for, or noted that rather than the plan before that of having potential regional treatment plants in the northern part of the watershed, in the western part of the watershed, that all treatment would happen at 9 Springs. So at this point, the three remaining compliance options that we have included are water quality trading and adaptive management, as well as reducing or eliminating flow to the Sugar River Basin. So at this point, I'm going to go into each of these options just a little bit. So watershed adaptive management and water quality trading are two different watershed-based compliance approaches. They're a little different though. Water quality trading means that you are offsetting the number of pounds that you're discharging over. So if we're discharging 6 pounds a day more phosphorus than the stream can handle, or that we're allowed to by permit, then we need to put in place practices that will offset those 6 pounds. So for a water quality trading plan to work in the Badger Mill Creek subwatershed, we would need to offset about 2,200 pounds a year of excess phosphorus. The current point of compliance when we're discussing is either the point of where our flow comes into Badger Mill Creek, or we believe we could move that downstream to the bottom of the Huck 12, which is just south of Verona. The Badger Mill Creek Huck 12, even if we were to achieve that that entire sub-watershed as a trading area has very limited acres for non-point trades. And the reason this is really an important consideration is that there are two different types of trades we could work towards. One is a non-point trade. So those are the types of trades that or the types of projects that we're focusing on for the Yahara Winds project. So a lot of agricultural practices, tillage changes, cropping practice changes, manure management, things like cover crops and perennial vegetation. We're seeing prices about $15 to $200 a pound for those types of practices. Urban practices are working with urban stormwater and working to remove the additional phosphorus from that urban stormwater. The picture on the bottom left is a alum treatment stormwater project in the state of Minnesota. It's just an example of one of the type of urban practices that would be potential for removing additional phosphorus. You would be working to reconfigure a pond, adding a treatment and dosing system so that you could dose a pond to precipitate out more phosphorus. We worked with the city of Madison to look at one of their ponds. And while we could make that happen, it looks like it would be between $4,000 and $6,000 a pound, which is significantly more than the $15 to $200 a pound. So if you get into full compliance through urban trades, the good news is that the urban trades would have closer to a 1-to-1 trade ratio. So you would really be looking at just that 2,200 pounds or maybe 2,500 pounds of trades versus the non-point trades, which we would have a ratio of somewhere between 2 and 3. So we'd have to get 2 to 3 times as many pounds because of the potential for unreliability. But when we look at achieving compliance on Badger Mill Creek through water quality trading and only urban pounds, the cost becomes treatment to, or similar to treating the wastewater at Nine Springs. When we look, this is a graphic that shows the green area is the Sugar River Huck 12, which is the Huck 12 just west of Badger Mill Creek. The orange is the Badger Mill Creek Huck 12. The star is approximately where the district discharge location is, and the purple is the Yahara Basin to the east. The red line is CARPC's urban service area boundary. And the reason that's important, especially in the Badger Mill Creek Huck 12, is that there's only a small amount of area that is outside of the urban service area. So that area is in the southeast side of that orangish area and the far kind of northwest side of that orange sub-watershed. Those are the areas where there are potential for non-point trades. Now, we have talked to owners and producers in the Badger Mill Creek Huck 12, and while there's interest in watershed approaches in doing some sort of trading program, the longevity of those trades is really we believe we could get 10-year trades, but after 10 years, there's so much development pressure in that subwatershed that it's very, very hard to get anything that we could have longer than 10 years. And the district plans to exist in perpetuity. So we need a compliance approach that is going to help us in the future. When you look at this area, the adjacent Huck 12, the one immediately to the west, the green area, has a lot of area that is not in the current urban service area. There's a large portion of that area that is agricultural, and owners and producers that want to maintain that rural Wisconsin footprint, farming in the area. There's people who are working together to try to put together water quality improvement plans. So there's the potential to invest in something that really could change the future of the watershed. And when you look at these two sub-watersheds, they come together where I put the arrow over the point of compliance. So when we look at phosphorus reductions that are done in the orange area or the green area, at the point of compliance, they're they've been put in place. So we have that many pounds of phosphorus that is no longer ending up in the water quality from that point of compliance down the Sugar River, into the Rock River, into the Mississippi, and into the dead zone in the Gulf. So overall, if we're putting practices in the green area, they're helping a significant portion. And that's the discussion that we're trying to work with DNR on, is expanding from that HUC 12 area to the broader HUC 10, but not even the whole HUC 10. The HUC 10 expands wider than these two HUC 12. So when we talk about watersheds, it's the larger watershed has less numbers. And then as you break that into pieces, then you add numbers on. So you can go from a HUC 8 to a HUC 10 to a HUC 12. The HUC 12 is a smaller area. So we want to broaden that area out a little bit to include that Sugar River HUC 12, where trading would be more viable than in that Badger Mill HUC 12. It doesn't mean we wouldn't focus on projects in the Badger Mill HUC 12. It just means that I haven't found, other than urban trades, a way that we could achieve full compliance in that Badger Mill HUC 12. Adaptive management is another way of putting in place watershed approaches to nutrient compliance. The difference between water quality trading and adaptive management is, in water quality trading, we are looking at like that. The Badger Mill Creek in the background of my picture, that amount of water has 6 pounds per day more phosphorus than we can discharge. So what we need to do is put in place 6 pounds a day of practices such that it's a checkbook accounting program. We account for our pounds, we offset them, we're good. In adaptive management, the goal is an in-stream change in water quality such that the stream is meeting water quality criterion. So you have to put in place enough pounds such that at the point you're measuring at, that stream will meet water quality criterion. So it's a different perspective. So anything is on the table, and that is what we're undertaking in the Yahara with adaptive management in the Yahara Winds project. So with water quality trading, we'd be looking at about 2,200 pounds. If we're looking on the agricultural non-point side, we probably have trade ratios of 2.5 to 3. In adaptive management, we'd need to account for, at the point of compliance, all the pounds that are needed to bring that water quality to a 0.075 milligrams per liter. So when we looked at the flow at the USGS gauge and the grab sample data that we have from our monitoring, it looks like we'd need to achieve about 7,600 pounds if we were limited to the Badger Mill Creek HUC 12. If we expanded that adaptive management project to both the west, the green area and the orange area of the last graph, so the Sugar River and the Upper Sugar River and the Badger Mill Creek sub HUC 12s, we would need to account for about 24,000 pounds each year. And I want to put this in a little bit of perspective. So we discharge 8% of our flow to Badger Mill Creek, so about 3.6 million gallons a day. In comparison, the Yahara Winds project is taking about 92% of our flow. We're also looking at the success of the project will achieve compliance for 92% of our flow, the compliance for 2 other permitted wastewater treatment plants, 20 municipal stormwater permittees with WPDS permits. And that project is looking at putting in place about 96,000 pounds of phosphorus. There's also many differences between the Yahara and Badger Mill Creek. So here's the graph that we just showed blown up on the Upper Sugar River green, the Badger Mill orange. The purple is the Yahara River Basin, and the red is the Carp Sea Urban Service Area. When you look at the purple area, there are significant portions of the Yahara that are outside the urban service area. In addition, there is a TMDL already for the Rock River, of which the entire Yahara is part. So that TMDL identified phosphorus reductions that were needed by the other treatment plants and the municipal stormwater entities that are in the Yahara. So there were already engaged partners that needed to do something that we were able to bring together in order to make the Yahara Winds project a reality. There is no TMDL in the Sugar River. There's the potential for a TMDL in the future. If the district is discharging to the Sugar River when that TMDL comes into play, we will have to do something. We could try to get ahead of it now and continue discharging there and find a way that we are complying through this phosphorus compliance options. The third option that we're continuing to vet is modifying the flow to Badger Mill Creek. In this option, phosphorus would be, the flow to Badger Mill Creek would be modified either 100% or a portion of that flow. When we if we discontinued flow to Badger Mill Creek, that flow would then be pumped from our plant to Badfish Creek. Along with the flow, it would move the phosphorus pounds to Badfish Creek. So if we moved if we stopped discharging to Badger Mill, we would move that flow to Badfish. Those pounds of phosphorus would also follow that, and we would need to comply with phosphorus for those pounds as well in the Yahara. So it would require us expanding the number of pounds that we'd need to go after with the Yahara Winds project. As I mentioned before, the energy study that was approved by the commission recommends looking at this option as an energy and carbon saving proposition. Badfish Creek appears to have the capacity to take the remaining 8% of our flow. It is included in a lot of our design decisions. We would need to work with DNR on permit modifications and changes if we were to pursue this option. One of the reasons that it's important to look at this option is because stream classifications really matter for WPDS permits. And we see the impact in our permit being more restrictive for the 8% flow that goes to the Sugar River than the 92% that goes to the Yahara River. So when Wisconsin, well, I guess in general, criteria for designated uses look at either human health or ecosystem health. We look at public health and welfare, recreation, fish and aquatic life, and wildlife impacts. And then the DNR sets water quality criterion for toxics, for temperature, taste and odor, bacteria, phosphorus, in these different categories. The higher quality resource water, the more restrictive the permit requirements. When we look at our discharge locations, Badfish Creek is our discharge point 001, and we have CBOD requirement of 19 milligrams per liter, TSS of 20 milligrams per liter, ammonia maximum of 17, and we don't have any limits for thermal. But when we look at Badger Mill Creek, our effluent outfall 005, our CBOD requirement goes down to 7 from May to October. Our TSS goes down to 10. Our ammonia is capped at 11. And we already have alternative effluent limits for the winter months. There's also been significant discussions and recommendations from DNR to raise the classification of Badger Mill Creek again. Now, if that becomes actually is classified as trout stream and cold water, our requirements become even more restrictive. Immediately, we will have, in our next permit, we need to reapply for alternative effluent limit for temperature. And we were very close to a couple other months, even with the lower classification of the stream. And DNR went to bat for us to help get the alternative effluent in those winter months for this first permit term. Another reason we want to continue to look at this as a potential option is that Badger Mill Creek flows have changed. They've changed since we started this flow moving to Badger Mill Creek. We started returning flow to Badger Mill Creek after Verona discontinued operating their treatment plant, which did discharge into the Sugar River Basin. So these two graphs show data from 2007 on the left to 2021 on the right. The upper graph is looking at the flow in red at the Bruce Street USGS gauge. So that's how much flow we're seeing where the old Verona wastewater treatment plant was located. The blue is what MMSD is sending to the Sugar River, or sending to Badger Mill Creek, the Sugar River Basin. So when we were starting to discharge, on the left side of the graph, when we were not discharging, Badger Mill Creek at Bruce Street had very little flow. Over time, there's been significantly more flow in Badger Mill Creek. The graph on the bottom shows the percentage of the Badger Mill Creek flow that is from MMSD effluent. So again, and that's a percentage. So the graph is shown in percentage. So sometimes we were 100% of the flow back when we started to discharge there. Now, if we look towards the right side of the graph, the district flow maxes out around 40% of the flow at Bruce Street, and sometimes is very, very small percentage of that flow. We ended up having an opportunity to retroactively look at what would happen if we were to discontinue flow in Badger Mill Creek. And as part of our Nine Springs, I think it was the Nine Springs Interceptor project, we needed to shut the flow off in Badger Mill Creek for 3 weeks in May into June of 2021. We worked with DNR to get that shutdown approved. And in the report, I kind of go through a lot more information. We kind of looked and gleaned what would happen. It's not a full year of a test. It's a 3-week period. But when the flow had been shut down for a few days, I went and I walked the stream just to see what was going on. And the photo on the left is a picture from that time. So it's from the 5th day of the flow being discontinued. And it was at if you've ever biked or walked along the bike path that goes by the effluent structure that's behind my head here on Badger Mill Creek, and you come to the first crossroad, that's Old Highway PB. So this picture is looking upstream at that point. So it's where the first crossroad that Badger Mill Creek comes to after we discharge to it. So when I was walking and looking, what I noticed was that there was still flowing through that area. The picture on the right was a picture taken and went to the same spot in April of this year just to see and take pictures and look. So there was flow in April when we were discharging fully as well. The graphs on the top are from the USGS gauge and is showing at Bruce Street, which is downstream from this point, what the flows were. The flows at Bruce Street were about 10 CFS when we weren't discharging at all. And they were about 16 when we were, which makes sense because we discharge about 3.6 MGD and 6, which would be about 6 CFS. So it makes sense that we're about, that there still is flow at Bruce Street, there still is flow at Old PB. We do see a drop in the very low flow data, but it doesn't drop to a stream not being there. And as we saw in the previous graph, there is a significant variability in flow in that stream. So a lot more high flow events than these very low flow events. So the report that we submitted in your packet was from the district perspective. So we know We looked at this from our perspective, looked at each of the options, but we know that there's a lot of other impacts to each of these options. And we want to strive to understand all the interests around this topic. So we are currently working to secure a public relations consultant to assist with community and stakeholder engagement. The specific types of engagement will be determined based on our consultant's expertise, but it could involve focus groups, public meetings, information sessions, one-on-one meetings. This consultant will work very closely with district staff and really work to listen and hear what are some of the concerns and what are the desires of various stakeholders. We are currently receiving proposals from interested parties, and we'll plan to get someone on board pretty quickly and start work in July. And ideally, we would be able to complete this project later this year. The next steps are, number one, the commission resolution that you have in your packet. Number two is to engage this outreach consultant. Number three is to incorporate the learnings from you, from the other stakeholders, and refine the potential compliance options. We would like to return to the commission with preferred alternative in the winter of 2022 and submit a final compliance options report to DNR as shown in our permit by March 31st, 2023. With this point, I am done, and I would appreciate any questions, thoughts, ideas.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. Interesting, a lot of interesting choices. Grant, you have your hand up?
Thank you, President Hubble, and again, awesome presentation. Thank you, Kathy. We're really getting hammered today with all this heavy content. Really good work. On the graph that you had over time, I think it was 14 years or so. What's the inflection point in, like, I don't know, 2014, 15? It looked like maybe, in both, where the percentage of flow drops and then the overall flow kind of seems to stay higher.
Yeah. Anecdotally, there's been a huge growth in the southwest side of Madison. The Highway 151 construction, the growth on the area everywhere from Highway PD and Target all the way down to Epic has infilled very significantly in that portion. So it's changed, the watershed has changed significantly in that period.
So just basically more development is moving more water into the creek faster. And so in some ways, while the original goal was to not pull water out of that watershed, so we're kind of going out of the way to return it back there, because of just more urbanization, there's less infiltration and retention on the surface, and it's getting kind of dumped into the creek faster.
Yeah, and there's also a big study going on right now with the city of Fitchburg, the town of Verona, on the Goose Lake area and the hydrology. There's been a lot of flooding even by our pump station, and trying to reduce that flooding, and they're looking at potential options that would increase the flow to Badger Mill Creek. And some of the, I didn't go into everything here, but I did include in the report some of the 100-year flood increases. And when we look at our flow being 6 milligrams or 6 CFS, the amount of flow that they're looking to put into the creek that isn't there now is very significant. I've been working with the consultants in the city and the town to try to get a low flow estimate. Like, what do these options do on the 0 to 1 year flood event, return events? Because they're planning to lower the surface elevation of Goose Lake by putting additional culverts in and changing some of the drainage between Goose Lake and our effluent discharge location. So those, so there will be impacts, but I don't have firm data on the 0 to 1 year flow events yet.
So Kathy, did we start, was it 07 when we first put in the discharge?
08, I think.
08? Okay,
So
so
I guess it's
it's
2000.
interesting because Goose Lake was fairly level until we got to that flooding events of 06, 07. I think it was
Okay.
06 and 07 we had the heavy rain. And then that caused the massive increase in water. In all our decisions based on at that time, based on the transfer of water Badger Mill Creek were based basically on the low flow that was being experienced due to development. That in fact, what was happening is development and water drawdown from the municipal wells were causing the cones of depression, which affected the flow into the stream. And so the idea was that we had to replace the water we were withdrawing, or at least part of it, from the wells that were caused by the cone of depression from the wells back into the stream. And it's actually rather surprising because I would have expected with urban development that you would have much more up and down, that you get the heavy flow and you get a lot of water there, but maybe it's the flooding that's occurred over time. And then now that like Goose Lake is feeding the groundwater potentially into Badger Mill Creek rather than the other way around where the groundwater is feeding Goose Lake.
That is really interesting. I was also on a call with the Madison Water Utility the other day, and they noted that they're seeing increases, that like their cones of depression are decreasing as pumping has significantly dropped. They're pumping less water than they were 20 years ago, and they're actually seeing with that those aquifers are coming up. So maybe there's also that at play, but I have not dug in far enough to know that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So all the water saving devices are actually helping. We can only see that with the district because our flow's been pretty much stable for 30 years. Yeah.
Yep, you're right on. And the water utilities are pumping significantly less than they were. 25% of the water that's used by the drinking water is used by flushing toilets, and the low flow toilets made a big difference. And then all the other water saving fixtures have also. So that's a good success story, and it has a range of impacts.
Okay.
So just one follow up on that. So, I mean, I guess my understanding at this point is kind of the only good reason to continue pushing flow there is to sort of bring water back there, from a kind of environmental perspective. Sounds like the value of that, or the dependency on that from our effluent is maybe not as strong as we thought it might have been back in the day. Maybe things are changing, not totally clear. If it is still important, how do we evaluate how important it is, I guess, for the health of kind of the watershed of the creek area? What does DNR think about it? Other folks that we've talked to CARPC I know has some real good knowledge around some of the stuff. I'd be really interested, kind of what their perspective is, and if ultimately as a community, if we have to decide between sort of a bit drier but higher quality, if we stop to discharge, for example, versus more flow but kind of temperature and phosphorus wise less quality. Any feedback or thoughts that we have from folks?
Yeah, and these are some of the things that we want to engage with our outreach consultant. We really want to be listening to all the stakeholders. There's a variety of different voices at DNR. There's, as you mentioned, CARPC. There's a variety. I mean, there's companies that livelihood depends on being able to have flow in Badger Mill Creek all the time, with kayak rentals and other things. We know the city, we know the neighbors, we know that there are a lot of different people who have things to say, have ideas, have thoughts. And we talk about the quality of Badger Mill Creek. It's stocked as a trout stream. So it is, a lot of that flow is district effluent, and it's stocked as a trout stream. Even though the thermal requirements for the state require us to get alternative effluent limits because our effluent is a little too warm in the winter months. We're actually cooler than other streams in the summer months. So it's actually helping cool that stream in some months but we don't get credit for that. We have to actually apply and work towards permitting alternative effluent limits for the months when we're too warm. So there's a variety of trade-offs in both ecological and human. So we do want to continue to listen, to hear, to understand the different perspectives and the desires. So.
Well, thank you. Look forward to hearing more about this and appreciate all the great work that's been done so far. Thank you.
Kathy, I've got one question. You mentioned that the DNR may do another classification change, upgrade to Badger Mill Creek, and then that would cause a whole series of other events. So do you have any idea when, because what I don't want to do is get into something and we set parameters and then all of a sudden they've switched the parameters on us into something that that's basically unmeetable.
Mm-hmm.
Or very, very difficult and expensive to meet. So do you have any idea when that decision might be made?
Well, you just hit on my greatest fear. If someone were to engage me and ask me my greatest fear, that's my greatest fear. In that we already know that we have more restrictive requirements in Badger Mill Creek. We are running and discharging and getting kind of graded. I mean, we saw the CMAR and what the district has to meet. We have to comply with our permit requirements because we run one wastewater treatment plant. Our effluent is all treated to the same level. So we are already needing to meet the requirements in Badger Mill Creek. If we know that there's going to be nitrogen requirements, we're required to monitor right now. At some point, those are going to come into play. DNR has been kicking around whether they want to look at lower chloride potential permit limits in the future. I think that's a little ways out, but our neighboring states have lowered them. We know that we have thermal requirements already that we discharge. We're higher than we can discharge to Badger Mill Creek. Again, Badfish Creek has no thermal limits. There are other parameters that could be coming to play. DNR continues to kick around. They have reports that note that they have their biologists believe it should be a trout stream. They believe it, and where that compliance point comes into play. They don't have a firm deadline at this point on making that change, but if they do make that change, it will impact our permit.
Okay, so has anybody done the math to figure out what level of flow we could put in under our current loading pounds as to how much that would be, if we're doing 3.6 million gallons per day at, what was it, 6 pounds? And then has anybody done the math? I don't know if it's how it correlates or not, but to reduce it down to 0.75?
The problem is that our concentration, it's like the concentration is the challenge. So our concentration is going to be the same. So even if we discharge lower, we'd have less pounds to go after, but we still
okay. Got it. Okay, so it's concentration. When you're saying pound, I thought it was kind of like the total number of pound. Got it.
No,
okay.
It's taking that 0.2 to 0.07, 0.3 to 0.075 milligrams per liter.
Yep. Okay. So anybody else have any questions or comments? I don't see any other hands. Do we need a motion to approve, to accept the thing which really begins as Grant was mentioning, the outreach to various governmental agencies and the public and residents in that area. So I don't see anybody else. Do we have a motion to approve the preliminary options for the Badger Mill Creek phosphorus compliance?
I'll make that motion. Commissioner Meyer here.
Motion by Commissioner Meyer. Do we have a second?
This is Sarah. I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Eskridge. Any further comments or questions?
I'll have questions, I'm sure, when the report comes back in the fall.
I'm sure
but I think for now, Great presentation, Kathy, and looking forward to some of that more in-depth, stakeholder outreach plus analysis of some of the details of hydrology and chemistry and all the rest of it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Agreed.
really interesting. It's really interesting. Okay. All those in favor of the accepting the options for the Badger Mill Creek phosphorus compliance, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None, motion carries. Okay. Thank you very much, Kathy. This is really interesting. It shows how much stuff has changed in 20 years. Okay, that will take us to the CED report. Michael?
Thank you, President Hubble. I have three updates for you. As most of you have experienced, we had a major storm event on Monday afternoon, and MG&E described this event as not seeing damage to their system as significant as this in more than 30 years. And there were a number of separate incidents that were extremely rare in our territory of power outages. Of course, power impacts the district in terms of our ability to keep our pumping stations and our plant running. 5 total stations lost power across the service area, and outages were due to loss of electrical feeds. And one of our stations that has dual feeds, we lost both feeds, and the other one as well, and some of our Madison pumping stations. And that is where our crews were dispatched to bring mobile power to the smaller stations in the city system, and continuing to manage our 2 pumping stations, pumping station 15 and 16, to monitoring flows there. We did not have any overflows or backups, and that is due to our team working, mobilizing quickly in the afternoon and working through the evening to keep our energy systems, or at least our auxiliary energy systems, working. So it's a good story, and it really reinforced the need for off-grid power supplies at our pumping stations and here at the treatment plant. And as you know, the commission has been approving upgrades to our lift stations and our pumping stations to include off-grid power supplies. And for example, new stations and pumping station 13 and 14 have new generators on pads right now, and those new improvements are close to being done. In pumping station 18, one of our largest pumping station, had a generator installed in 2012. We're also working with Madison Gas and Electric on a long-term service agreement for MG&E to provide off-grid power to the treatment plant. And we're currently working with MG&E. They will build the power supply, they will operate it and maintain it for an annual fee. And we just need to tell MG&E how much demand we will have and for how long. And we are working with MG&E on the terms of what our needs are to be a resilient utility. And that generator is right in the Nine Springs footprint here, where there's an MG&E transfer station. So it's very close. So that's what's happening with energy and power, and in our good news story getting through this major event. The second thing is interns, and we have created an internship program, and it is directly linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Collectively, we are being intentional about cultivating relationships with college partners, which help us to increase the pipeline of diverse graduates we hire here at the district. And they are involved and work in just about every department we have. And it's in a coordinated effort that's been led by Ileana Rodriguez out of our Human Resources Department. And these programs really solidify our relationships with the universities and colleges and provide that opportunity for those in college to look at their careers. For me, an internship opportunity I had in 1982 influenced me to stay in public service. I worked for the village of Greendale for the city engineer right out of high school. And I was so impacted by that experience early in my own career. It allowed me and wanted me to pursue a career in civil engineering in the public sector. So I see how these short internships can have long-term value. And then the final thing is strategic planning, and that I wanted to share with you. Our next meeting will be an in-person meeting, and it will be what will likely be the culmination of the great work the commission has done so far. And we'll be putting the entire package together with strategic purpose, owner expectations, and performance areas, so you can see the whole picture together and provide final input on that. It should be pretty close. And then we'll be moving into, at that meeting, setting priorities that will inform me in the development of my 2023 budget. So the commission will be engaged in priority setting at this meeting. And I would like to, my goal is to get it done in 2 hours, but I'd like to reserve added time at this meeting. Should we go a little bit longer, maybe 3 hours, to assure we get through the priority setting part of this, to give us our staff time to start building the budget for next year. So that's what's happening. And I'll pause there. President Hubble, to see if there's any questions with my report.
Yep. Anybody have any questions? I don't think so. Okay, thank you, Michael. That will move us to Paul, regulatory and legal.
Good morning.
Actually-
This is Vanessa. Paul had to hop off. Yep, good morning. Paul just had to hop off for another meeting, so I'll do the legal update. I wanted really to note 2 items on your legal review. One, I think Paul already mentioned that the surface and drinking water rules for PFAS have been approved through JCRAR at the legislature. There was a meeting held with DNR, but then no revisions suggested. So those rules will move through to become final approved rules and become effective after publication. Again, that was for the drinking water PFAS rule and the surface water rule for PFAS. And then the other point I wanted to note from our regulatory update is this draft guidance on variance, on water quality standards variances that DNR has released for public comment. We are reviewing that in coordination with the district. It's possible that the way that guidance is formulated could have an impact on the modification to Badger Mill Creek compliance option that Kathy discussed previously. So we're taking a close look at that and working alongside the district on possible comments on that guidance document. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, I don't see any hands. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks for filling in for Paul. I didn't see that he had left. That will take us to Kathy Wunderlich's going to talk about the CIP implementation update and trends.
All right. Good morning. Let me share my desktop here. All right, and I will be able to keep this somewhat brief. This is meant to be more of a high level type of presentation. So good morning. Just wanted to share a little bit with you this morning about the 2022 CIP implementation and the trends that we're seeing in the utility construction industry. So in the 2022 CIP, there was a variety of focus areas: aging infrastructure, increased regulation and compliance, climate change, and capacity needs. And the solution to those provided were the projects and the programs that were presented in the 2022 CIP. Specifically, there were 18 projects associated with the treatment plant for a cost of about $5 million. There were 9 interceptor projects for a cost of about $9 million, 8 pumping station projects that were about $7 million. So the total for the 2022 CIP for that specific year was about $22 million. So with that, we have to balance, needs, benefits, priorities, projects that have been historically prioritized. That it was based on greatest need to meet the 4 objectives that we just talked about. The specific projects with the highest needs are the ones that were selected to go first. It's no secret that we're in a volatile economic climate for more than the last year. 2 factors are being now taken into consideration when we move projects forward, both in design and in construction. Those are the lead times that it takes for us to obtain that associated equipment, to get it on site, to get it installed and commissioned, as well as our ability to change a project scope and potentially postpone it based on the associated risks of delay. We have not seen the level of delivery delays, the cost increases, or the inflation rates skyrocket so quickly as what they've done over the course of the last year. So in this slide, just wanted to show over the last 60 years what the inflation rates have looked like. And you can see in beginning in 2020, the surge of inflation that's really affected most of the world. The primary reasons for this big spike in inflation are supply shortages caused by the COVID pandemic, strong consumer demand that's driven by a robust job and wage growth as the pandemic receded. Inflation rates are a direct reflection of supply and demand within the economy, the labor market, the workforce conditions. And when you have a decrease in unemployment, the supply of work market falls, and then in turn the wages increase and we see inflation. So just a few statistics. The US unemployment rate is down 2.4%. It's down to 3.8% now, which is 2.4% lower than what it was a year ago. And then our supply demand is up 3.5% from where it was a year ago. So, there is definitely some influence on the war in all of this and the availability of fuel. We actually, I wanted to show this one here, that when we look at where we are compared to others around the world, we're not the only one, and we're certainly not the greatest one who's experiencing these significant rates of inflation. You'll see Russia at 17.8%, Brazil at 12%. We are sitting at 8.3% right now, India, South Africa. And for the majority of these countries, this is the highest than what they've seen in the last 40 years. So when we look at the course of the last year, where we've been, we can see a year ago that we were about 5.4% inflation. And currently, as of June 2022, we're sitting about 8.6% inflation. It's continued to grow. And again, this inflation is believed to be a direct result of supply chain shortage, the higher fuel prices, and then also higher food cost due to the harvesting and the transportation of that food. So the good news is that the forecast does look hopeful. A variety of sources indicate that inflation should slowly improve to something more normal in the mid to late 2023. So, as far as what that means for us, to talk a little bit about our capital infrastructure plan improvements, is that and experience all facets of life. We've seen this, since COVID had started. The availability of all kinds of materials and equipment are scarce. Nationally, utilities are experiencing supply chain shortages from anything from sewer pipes and valves to equipment such as pumps, generators, controls. And as a result, there are significant delays in delivery of these items on our projects that impact the overall timeline and the cost of construction. Electrical equipment is by far the worst for delays. It's upwards of 1 to 2 years, depending on what type of equipment it is, as opposed to what used to be 4 months during normal conditions. Some specific examples would be that we use on a day-to-day basis would be ductile iron pipe, 8 to 12-inch ductile iron pipe. The lead time on that is 1 to 1.5 years, whereas larger diameters are readily available. So that's something that we'll have to take into consideration, is availability of materials when we're designing our projects. Larger 24-inch PVC is out 3 to 4 months. Hobus or other specialty pipe is a year plus on those pipes. Shutoff valves, electrical controls are 8 to 10 months, where the switch gear is over 2 years. Generators are over a year. So the other side of this is that when you add in supply chain shortages, equipment delays, labor shortages, we're seeing substantially higher project costs. Construction costs over the last 6 months have been coming in as much as 50% higher than previously estimated, with the exception of transportation projects that are heavy in granular type of materials. Utility corridor and building types of projects are reflecting these higher costs, so it's making it difficult for us to estimate what the true construction costs are. And then having to make a decision when those bids come in as to how we should move forward with those projects. There have been substantially more projects in which bids are being rejected. Projects are being rescoped, rescheduled, or delayed entirely. The city of Fitchburg, city of Madison, Wisconsin DOT, et cetera, they are currently rejecting bids, rescoping their projects, redesigning projects, or delaying them altogether. So for us, as much flexibility as we can provide in our construction schedules in consideration of a wider range of material types and sizes will help us mitigate some of these conditions of the economic climate that we're in. So specifically, right now we're in a bit of a weather the storm type of mentality. The things that we can do that we have control over, is the best that we can do. We should expect this uncertainty for at least the next 1 to 2 years. We need to be adaptive and flexible, take each year one at a time, and perhaps adjust our plans accordingly. We need to focus our efforts on the most critical path items and our most immediate needs. Understanding that equipment delivery is a critical path for projects, we're identifying those projects that likely have the longest lead times on materials and equipment, and then trying to build a schedule around those factors, specifically the date that we need to have these projects in place. And then we are revisiting the progress of these projects at least on a monthly basis. There are projects that we anticipated to bid out and start construction in 2022. We may need to rebid those and delay them for construction in 2023 if that's an option. There are projects that absolutely cannot wait, whereas there are projects that potentially could wait until next year. The thing that we have to be cognizant of is the consequences of delay outweighing the increased costs, and delaying those projects may not be an option. So that is really all that I had prepared for you all today, and can take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Anyone have any questions? Grant?
Thank you, Kathy. Another really great presentation, and it's a real challenging work you've got right now. I'm on the Board of Public Works for Madison, and everything you're sharing, we're obviously seeing and feeling there as well. I very much support and agree kind of the approach you're outlining at the end, and support holding off on anything that we're able to do or where the consequences aren't too significant. One question, and I mean, it may not be realistic at all, but in terms of the material shortages that you were talking about, if we are able to postpone some projects, I mean, some of them we just may simply have to if we can't get what we need. But is there are we able to like get in line and work towards sourcing sort of directly any materials, and for a sort of a known anticipated future project? Or does that just get too messy where we really just need to wait until materials are broadly available, and then the contractors are the ones that are still going to be the ones sourcing the materials? I don't know if that made sense, but is there anything we can do to kind of take on some of that work so that then we just need to find the labor, but we've actually got the materials where other people might still be looking for them?
Yeah, and that is certainly a fine line for us to walk, because one of them is having storage, for that equipment and those materials. The other thing too is that when we procure those in advance of construction, we take on a liability if the design is right, if it'll fit in the doorways, just things like that. There's a lot of ancillary types of things that when the contractor is the one who's responsible for purchasing that equipment, it's up to them to install it properly, to think through all of that, how it's going to be done, when it's going to be done. So it's certainly that on a project by project basis, we can continue to look at and evaluate if that's a viable option.
And as an alternative, is there any way to bid out and sort of start a relationship with somebody that is sort of contingent on the sourcing of that thing, but that still somehow gets us into the queue in a way?
No, the biggest thing that we can do is just be really smart and stay in very close contact with suppliers and contractors, which we've been doing. We're talking to them on a weekly basis and trying to understand ways that we can set ourselves up for success, to minimize what those impacts are in delays and shortages.
That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you doing that. And again, for the presentation, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay.
I just want to say that this sets us up for the CIP discussion that the commission, when we present the draft CIP to you, and we've been looking at all the projects on a holistic basis and how we time these projects, and what they're going to cost. So this will be leading into that discussion with the commission in July.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, so that takes us to future agenda topics. Sarah, on behalf of the CED Review Committee, made a request to have about an hour of time for the July 14th meeting. So that might make a longer meeting. We also have, I think, that meeting, the auditor presentation, which takes some time. So it might be going long as this meeting, or maybe longer, I don't know. Does anybody have any issues with that? It should be moved to, I know we're down to 5, we're right at the quorum right now. Okay, so expect that on the July 14th agenda. Is that going to be?
President Hubble, on that last, could maybe somebody just send out sort of the future dates and I mean, is that the same meeting that Michael was describing, maybe having 3 hours instead of 2, or are those different meetings?
That's the one that was 3 hours is the last meeting in June that Michael was first describing. And then the 14th meeting is different from the one with the strategic planning.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. So strategic planning will be, their next meeting will be in person at the district, as we hopefully are completing our strategic planning, and that's the one that's 2 to 3. And I was going to ask Michael, do you see that the 14th meeting would be in person, or is that going to be virtual? July 14th.
That's always up to the commission, but at this point, it's planned to be virtual.
Okay,
And,
so we'll probably plan on the July 14th meeting being virtual. And is that a closed session that Sarah wanted? I don't remember.
yes, it will. It'll be a closed session, reviewing the performance of the chief engineer and director. And so that's, I'm also looking at the agenda to see if there are some other items that are currently scheduled that may not have as much timeliness that could be moved to allow for more time.
To move back. Okay, good. Okay, Grant, you have a question?
Yeah, just one other item for consideration for future agenda items. Sounds like it may not be space on the 16th, but I think it'd be nice to do a review of kind of our experience with in-person hybrid, kind of a check-in with that, and just revisit sort of what our plans and agreements are.
Okay. Okay, so then that takes, anybody else have anything under future business? No, okay, so plan on the 14th, the CED a review of the performance review. And then that will take us other business, and then a motion to adjourn.
I'll channel Tom Wilson and gladly move that we adjourn.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Murphy, second by
Foster.
Second by Commissioner Foster to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.
Take
You
care,
too.
everyone. Thanks, staff.
Bye-bye.
Meeting.
We'll see you at the district in 2 weeks.
Sounds good.